Picture this. Dawn breaks over the Lowveld. A pale mist rolls across the fever trees and the thorn scrub, and somewhere in the half-light, a pride of lions begins to stir. The king, a massive black-maned male, lifts his head and scans the horizon. For a moment, everything is still. Everything is perfect. Now imagine that same scene 10 years from now. Except this time, there are no lions. That is not a hypothetical. That is, according to scientists, wildlife rangers, and conservationists on the ground, a very real possibility for parts of one of Africa's most celebrated wilderness areas, the Kruger National Park. Welcome. In this video, we are going deep into one of conservation's most urgent and underreported crises, the collapse of Kruger's lion population, driven by targeted poaching and a little-known but devastatingly profitable trade, the trade in lion bones. Kruger National Park spans nearly 20,000 square kilometers across South Africa's Limpopo and Mpumalanga provinces. It is one of the largest game reserves on the African continent, home to an extraordinary diversity of wildlife: buffalo, elephant, leopard, rhino, and, of course, the African lion. For decades, Kruger was considered a stronghold for lions. At its peak, the park is estimated to have held somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 lions. These were not just numbers. They were the apex predators holding entire ecosystems in balance. Their hunts kept herbivore populations in check. Their territories shaped the behavior of every other species in the park. But something has gone very wrong. Surveys and field reports from researchers and SAN parks, South Africa National Parks, have painted a troubling picture. The lion population inside Kruger has been declining. Estimates from wildlife monitoring organizations suggest the number may have dropped to somewhere between 1,600 and as few as 1,000, with significant variance depending on methodology and season. What is not in dispute is the direction of the trend. It is going down, and poaching is a major reason why. When most people hear the word poaching in the context of Kruger, they think of rhinos. And rhino poaching has, quite rightly, received enormous media coverage. Thousands of rhinos have been killed in Kruger over the past 2 decades in a well-documented catastrophe. But lions? They barely make the headlines. Part of the reason is that lion poaching is harder to detect. Poachers targeting lions often use poison, lacing carcasses or water sources, killing entire prides in a single night. Gin traps and cable snares are also widely used. These are devices set low to the ground, hidden in tall grass, designed to catch an animal by the leg and hold it, sometimes for days, until the poacher returns, or until the animal dies from its injuries. These methods are not clean, they are not quick, and they are not discriminating. Snares and poison kill lions indiscriminately, males, females, cubs. An entire pride can be wiped out in a single incident. Unlike rhino poaching, which tends to target specific individuals for their horns, lion poaching can devastate a social group completely. There is also the issue of detection. A dead rhino is very hard to miss. It is large, and its horn is visibly removed. A poisoned lion carcass in the bush or a snared animal left to rot in dense vegetation can go undiscovered for weeks. By the time rangers find the evidence, the trail is cold. According to field researchers and anti-poaching units operating in and around Kruger, lion poaching incidents, though chronically underreported, have been increasing. The question is, who is ordering these killings and what are they after? Here is where the story takes a turn that many viewers will find deeply disturbing. Lions are being killed, not for trophies, not for their skins, though those markets exist, but for their bones. The trade in lion bones is driven primarily by demand from Southeast Asia, particularly from countries including Vietnam, Laos, and China. In these markets, lion bones are used as a substitute for tiger bones in the production of traditional medicines, tonics, and luxury products such as so-called tiger bone wine. As wild tiger populations collapsed and legal tiger bone trade became increasingly restricted, traffickers and consumers turned to lion bones as a replacement. The economics are stark. A full lion skeleton, dried, cleaned, and ready for export, can fetch tens of thousands of US dollars on the black market. That figure represents years of income for poachers operating in rural communities surrounding Kruger. South Africa actually operated a legal export system for lion bones for a number of years, allowing registered breeders from the controversial captive lion industry to export skeletons from captive-bred lions. The idea was that a legal regulated supply would reduce demand for wild lion bones. Critics argued the opposite, that any legalization of the bone trade served only to stimulate demand and provide cover for the laundering of wild-sourced bones. This debate is ongoing, but by 2021, South Africa's government announced it would phase out lion bone exports from captive animals, a significant policy shift, though enforcement remains a challenge. The connection between the bone trade and the poaching of wild lions in Kruger is not always direct, but the pipeline is real. Organized wildlife trafficking networks, many of which already operate rhino horn and ivory routes, have incorporated lion bones into their portfolios. Kruger's lions, accessible through porous boundaries and vast, unfenced border areas, are a target. To understand why Kruger's lions are so vulnerable, you need to understand the geography. Kruger shares its western boundary with a number of private game reserves and communal land areas. To the east, it borders Mozambique and Zimbabwe, across some of the most remote and difficult-to-patrol terrain on the continent. The Great Limpopo Transfrontier Park, which links Kruger with protected areas in Mozambique and Zimbabwe, is a magnificent conservation vision. But it also means lions move across international borders, often into areas with far less protection. The fences on Kruger's borders are extensive, over 800 kilometers in total, but they are aging, poorly maintained in places, and under constant pressure. Snares are set not just inside the park, but along corridors that lions use to move between areas. A lion that steps outside Kruger's boundary, even briefly, can enter a zone where it has almost no protection. Ranger capacity is another critical constraint. Kruger employs hundreds of field rangers, and they do extraordinary work under extraordinarily difficult conditions. But the park is vast, the terrain is brutal, and the poaching syndicates they are up against are sophisticated and well-resourced. These are not small-time opportunists. These are organized criminal networks with vehicles, communications equipment, and sometimes weapons that outmatch what rangers carry. There have been cases, documented and reported, where rangers confronting poachers have faced armed resistance. Anti-poaching in Kruger is not a job. It is a war, and it is a war being fought on a shoestring. Let us talk about what the science tells us about lion populations and why this matters so much. Lions have what biologists call a slow life history. Females do not reach sexual maturity until around 3 to 4 years of age. They typically produce litters of 2 to 4 cubs, and cub mortality in the wild, from predation, starvation, and infanticide, is extremely high, sometimes exceeding 50% in the first year. A lion pride takes years to rebuild after losses. This means that a lion population under sustained pressure does not simply bounce back. Remove too many breeding females, or destabilize the social structure of a pride by killing its dominant male, and recovery can take a generation. Kill multiple prides simultaneously, which organized poaching operations are capable of doing, and you can push a local population towards a tipping point from which natural recovery becomes statistically improbable. Genetic diversity is another factor that wildlife managers are increasingly concerned about. As lion numbers fall, inbreeding becomes a risk. Kruger's lion population has, historically, been somewhat genetically isolated from other large populations, meaning that a significant decline cannot easily be offset by immigration from outside the park. Researchers studying lion mortality in and around Kruger have consistently identified human-caused deaths, including poaching, snaring, and retaliatory killing by livestock farmers outside the park, as the leading cause of non-natural mortality in the population. The conclusion is not ambiguous. Without a dramatic reduction in human-caused deaths, the population trajectory will continue downward. It would be too easy and too dishonest to frame this story purely as a conservation crisis without engaging with the human realities that drive it. The communities living along Kruger's boundaries are among the most economically marginalized in South Africa. Unemployment is high. Access to services is limited, and for many families, the income offered by a poaching syndicate, whether to carry snares, act as a lookout, or guide outsiders to lion territories, represents a financial lifeline that legitimate employment simply does not provide. This is the engine of wildlife crime in southern Africa, and conservationists who ignore it do so at the cost of real-world effectiveness. Prosecution alone, locking up the foot soldiers of the poaching trade, does not stop the trade. It merely recruits new foot soldiers. Some of the most promising conservation initiatives in the Kruger region have taken this seriously. Community ranger programs, benefit-sharing schemes that direct tourism revenue to local villages, conservation employment initiatives, these represent an attempt to make wildlife worth more alive to the people who share space with it than it is dead. But these programs are chronically underfunded, unevenly implemented, and operating in a structural context, inequality, land dispossession, and political marginalization that they cannot fix on their own. The conservationists know it. The community members know it. The honest conversation about lion conservation in Kruger has to include this dimension, or it will keep failing. So what is the response? And is it enough? On the ground, sand parks and a range of NGOs and private operators have been ramping up anti-poaching efforts. Aerial surveillance using drones and fixed-wing aircraft is increasingly part of the toolkit. Ranger training has been upgraded in some areas. Snare removal programs, teams dedicated to systematically clearing the bush of wire traps, operate year-round. Technology is playing a growing role. Camera traps, acoustic monitoring, and GPS collars on individual lions allow researchers to track movement patterns and detect unusual activity. A lion that stops moving, for instance, may have been caught in a snare. Some conservation organizations are trialing AI-assisted detection systems that can analyze surveillance footage in near real time. International cooperation on wildlife trafficking has also intensified. South Africa works with Interpol, the CITES Secretariat, and regional partners to disrupt trafficking networks. Prosecutions of high-level wildlife traffickers, not just poachers, but the syndicates behind them, have increased. But the honest assessment from people working in this space is that the current effort, while necessary, is not sufficient. The demand for lion products in Asia has not meaningfully declined. The poverty and inequality that drives local participation in poaching has not been resolved. And the institutional capacity, both in terms of funding and political will, to protect a park the size of a small country remains stretched. What will it take? More sustained international funding for African conservation agencies, genuine investment in border community livelihoods, stronger, better enforced laws in destination countries for wildlife products, and a willingness at the governmental level in South Africa to treat lion conservation as the national emergency that the data increasingly suggests it is. We end where we began. That dawn scene over the Lowveld, the mist, the fever trees, the lion watching the horizon. The African lion is not merely a beautiful animal. It is a keystone species, a creature whose presence shapes an entire ecosystem. In its absence, prey populations explode and vegetation is overgrazed. Scavenger communities collapse. The cascades run deep in ways we are only beginning to fully understand. But beyond the ecology, there is something that resists purely scientific framing. There is the experience of encountering a wild lion in a wild place, the feeling that cuts through whatever armor modern life has built around you and reminds you, viscerally, that you are part of something ancient and vast. Kruger is one of the places on this planet where that experience is still possible, where a child can sit beside a parent in a dusty Land Rover and watch a pride move through golden grass at sunset and understand, without anyone needing to explain it, what is at stake.